Absolutely.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Streator Public Library. And what a great day this is for the city of Streator. What a great day for the citizens of LaSalle County. And what a great day for Civil War buffs and local historians throughout north central Illinois. Today's the day that the flag of the 53rd has finally come home. Welcome to the library. My name is David Reed, for those of you who do not know me. I think most of the people in the room do. I am the president of the Streator Historical Society. I'm also a past president of the LaSalle County Historical Society. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am that so many of you have given up part of your Veterans Day weekend to be with us to honor and rededicate this national treasure. Speaking of Veterans Day weekend, before I get too deep in the weeds here of the program, how many veterans do we have with us today? How many have answered the call? That is great. Thank you for your service from all of us. I've been the face of this project for almost 4 years now, but no way did I do this alone. This was a culmination of dozens of people. We do have some people here before I start my thank yous. We have some dignitaries that I would like to introduce. Of course, the greatest dignitaries we got are our veterans that we've already acknowledged. And again, thank you for your service. We also have the mayor of the city of Streator right here, Jimmy Lansford. Raise your hand. We have our city manager, Scott Wrighton, with us today. We have Ron Slack, who is the head of the Starved Rock Civil War Roundtable with us. Way back in the back, we have Mary Lou Anderson. She's the executive director of the Streator Historical Society. We have the head librarian here at Streator Public Library, Cynthia Maxwell. I know most of you have noticed and looked at this History Fair project here. Tanner Dominy, is that how I pronounce your name? Right here. Thank you for sharing that with us. And we also are honored to have Alex Dixon, who is the actual conservator of the flag. Arnie, come on in and grab a seat. No, they're not. No, they're not. I do have some thank yous that I'd like to do before we get too far into this also. First off, I want to thank my family. Not just my immediate family, but my brothers, their family, my wife's family. They all got behind this project. They knew how important and passionate I was about getting this done. They supported me by buying tickets. They came to all the fundraisers. They made donations. So heartfelt thank you to them, especially Kathy. She let this thing take over our house a couple of times, because not only did we have to raise money for the flag, but to do that, we organized a chicken spaghetti dinner, we had a trivia night, we had a band concert. Each one of them projects took over my office and part of the dining room, and she had to share me with Poundstone and the rest of the 55th. So thank you. Also want to thank Ron Slack and the Starved Rock Civil War Roundtable. Thank you, Ron. They got behind this project right from the beginning. When we started the fundraising portion of the project, they gave us our very, very first big donation, and that really got us jump-started. And then they followed it up with a year later, and they matched that donation. So thank you, Ron, and please pass that. I want to thank the LaSalle County Historical Society and the Streator Historical Society. I was president of both organizations when I learned about this project and decided to start it. They both said that they would back me, and they followed through, especially the Streator Historical Society. Every project I did, whether it be the chicken dinner or every fundraiser we did, They showed up, they manned all the projects. Thank you to the board of the Streator Land. I want to thank the library board. I see a lot of the members of the Streator Public Library Board here for allowing us to use this great building to house this national treasure. So thank you. Jean Holslander, where's Jean at? There she is. Jean Holslander is a good friend of mine. She made that replica flag that is in the back of the room. Stan Jijic and I drug that thing all over the county, and we sold chances on it everywhere that they would let us. Jean made that flag that we could do that. And Arnie Banstra, my friend Arnie here, who was one of my vice presidents at the LaSalle County Historical Society, made the stand. He's a woodworker on the site. He made that stand, and it comes apart, no tools required. And thank you to the two of you, because we made a lot of money off of that. I need to thank my Hags friends, and it's hard to call Carol and Linda and Paula and all my friends Hags. Hags is actually an acronym for Historical Alliance Group. Is that what it's in? Historical Alumni Group. We meet once a month for breakfast, those that can, and we were all involved with the LaSalle County Historical Society at the same time at one time. Our terms all ended at different times, but we've all stayed close. We meet for breakfast once a month, and some of us are involved with the Reddick Mansion, some are involved with the Canal Association, some of us are involved in local historical societies like the Streator Land Historical Society, and of course the Poundstone Flag Project. So we are staying united, and we're all involved in different things, and it's just been a great group of people. And like I said, it's hard to call them Hags, but I love them. I also want to thank the Friends of the Library, an auxiliary group here at the library. They paid for the light filtering shades in this room. It came at quite a cost, but it's one of the requirements of the Illinois State Military Museum to keep the light candles, is that what it's called, light candles? Foot candles, whatever, down to a certain level, but still make the room light enough to be able to read because it is a library. So thank you to them. And also, I want to thank Bob Deacon. Where's Bob at? He's right here. You're usually easy to see because you're the tallest guy on the horizon. I'm involved in a lot of things in the community. People that know me know that. I'm president of the Historical Society, president of the Lions Club, president of the community players at Engle Lane Theater. I'm vice president of the board of directors here at the library. And I'm not telling you that just to prove that I can't say no to people. I'm telling you that because every organization I have been involved with in Streator has been the beneficiary of Bob Deacon's generosity, one way or another. And I've seen what he's done in the community behind the scenes and under the radar. And one day I came home from work early on in this project. And my wife, who hadn't lived in Streator very long, wasn't real familiar with Bob Deacon's name yet. Told me as soon as I walked in the door, so a gentleman named Bob Deacon called. And he's interested in your Poundstone Flag Project. He wants you to call him back. Well, I'm not always the smartest guy in the room, but I am smart enough to know that if you're doing a fundraiser and Bob Deacon calls and wants you to call him back, it's a phone call you want to return. So I immediately did, and I went out to his office, and we talked for a little bit, and I was hoping he would make a donation, and he did one better. He made a pledge. And he pledged dollar for dollar, every dollar I raised, he was going to match it up to a certain amount. And he was glad to do it, and I'm glad to call you my friend, and I'm proud to know you. And I'd like to give you the podium here for a few seconds. So Bob, thank you from all of us.
There becomes a time in your life where you got to give back to the community you came to. And when I read this in the paper, I mean, it was a no-brainer to me. It was historic. It was something that was just, you just rang out that it was something I had to get involved in. You know, the flag is the only thing, as an American, that we all unite under. It's not pizza, it's not fried chicken, it's the American flag. And no matter where you see it, it is very important, you know, and it's very well respected. And so I thought that this would be really a great adventure. And so I took and thought about Mr. Poundstone. Janice Hart and I went down and visited the flag and saw it. And here's a man who, you know, in the last hours of his life, decided that he couldn't pick up his cell phone and call his parents, he couldn't text somebody. He had to find something that was really important to him, and it was this flag. And so as you see it, you'll see the last seconds of his life as he bled upon it and died. But today, we have a lot of people who don't respect the flag. We see it every day, we see it last night, we see it all the time. Many of them are quote-unquote overpaid professional athletes. But there's two important things that come from this flag in our history. And one is that it kept us united as one nation under God. And number two, it abolished slavery. And those are the two important. I thank you very much.
Before we unveil the flag in a few minutes, I'd like to give you a brief history of the flag. And I'm trying to keep it brief, but it's a great story, and I think it's a story everyone needs to hear so they understand what they're looking at when they see this flag on the wall. The flag was presented to the 53rd Illinois in very late December 1861. They were getting ready to leave and depart for Camp Douglas up in Chicago. It was given to them by the ladies of Bruce Township. Bruce Township is the city of Streator, basically. So they took the flag, they went off, they went to Camp Douglas. They were mustered into service on January 1st, 1862, New Year's Day. The flag and the 53rd were at Camp Douglas for about 11 weeks. It was during that time, that 11-week span, that Sgt Poundstone in Farm Ridge Township, about 8 miles straight up Route 23 here, right on Route 23 actually, it was during that time that he volunteered to be a part of the Color Guard unit. There are 10 members of a Color Guard unit. You have 2 flags, a national flag and a regimental flag, and each flag has 4 color guards because the flag bearers are unarmed. Each one of them has a guard. It has 4 guards around them. So those 10 people make up the Color Guard unit. They voted and selected Sgt Poundstone to be the color sergeant, the head of their Color Guard unit. Poundstone selected this flag to be the one he would carry. They were there for about 11 weeks. After 11 weeks at Camp Douglas, they were ordered down to Tennessee to join General Grant's army in central Tennessee. They caught up with General Grant on April 7th, 1862 at a place called Pittsburgh's Landing. Now, Civil War buffs in the room will know that April 6th and April 7th was the Battle of Shiloh, the biggest, baddest confrontation to ever happen on this continent up to that time. And fortunately for the 53rd, they arrived at that battle too late in the day to actually see any action. They were kept in reserve. But they saw the horrors of war that day for the first time. And from that day forward, the April of 1862 till May of 1863, for 13 months, the men of the 53rd, mostly made up of men and boys from LaSalle County, they fought constantly. They were at the Battle of Corinth, they were at Holly Springs, they were at LaGrange, they were at Grand Junction, they were at Memphis, they were at the Battle of Jackson, Mississippi, they were at the Battle of Champion Hill, and then finally with Grant they arrived at Vicksburg on May 19, 1863. So that's a lot of fighting to do in 13 months. Through every one of those engagements, Sgt Poundstone carried this flag. After they were at Vicksburg for the entire 6 weeks of the siege of Vicksburg. After Vicksburg, they were sent to Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson, Mississippi was located 40 miles east of Vicksburg. They went back and they were attached to General Sherman's army. The siege of Jackson began on July 10th, 6 days after Vicksburg fell. On July 10th, the siege began. The 53rd was at the far right of the Union line. They were under the direct command of General Jacob Lauman. General Joe Johnston of the Confederate Army was well entrenched in front of Jackson, Mississippi. He had about 25,000 men. His battle line was about 2 miles long. Sherman had 26,000 men. His battle line was 2.5 miles long. It was kind of in an arch around the outside of Jackson, Mississippi. Like I said, the men of the 53rd was on the far right under Brigadier General Jacob Lowney's command. The siege began on the 10th, but for some reason, July 12, 1863, Loudon ordered an ill-fated charge. He ordered 3 companies of the 53rd to get into formation and charge across that field. 450 yards between the 2 battle lines, known as no man's land. Now the men of the 53rd knew this was a suicide mission. That not half of them were probably going to get through across that field alive. They knew they were going to be killed, they'd be wounded, or they would be taken prisoner. For George Poundstone, all 3 of those things happened. But they were soldiers, and soldiers do what soldiers are told to do. They got into formation. George Poundstone got out in front with Colonel Seth Earl. He raised this flag, he held it high above his head, swung it around 3 times, which is the signal to start marching. They started across that field. They got about halfway. As soon as they started, the Confederate Army saw them coming, obviously. But they waited for them to get about halfway across that field, so they got into better range. At about the 250-yard mark, all hell broke loose. The Confederates yelled fire, and they were directly in front of the Washington artillery of the 1st Kentucky Brigade, the Orphan Brigade. They were directly in front of 6 cannons laid out in front of them. The first volley took out about half of the 53rd. Stopped them, I hate to use this pun, but stopped them dead in their tracks. The men stopped, they got off a few shots. After they got a few shots off, they regained their composure and they started forward a second time. They went a ways, they got stopped again. The second time they got stopped, excuse me, I get dry mouth. The second time they got stopped, some of the men got down on their hands and knees, some got down on their bellies to shoot back. They were trying to make themselves a smaller target. But the longer they stayed there, which was only a few minutes, but they soon realized that the longer they stayed there, the easier it was going to be for the enemy to get the range, especially with the heavy artillery shooting double canister at them. So they knew their best bet was to keep moving. They got up, they went forward a 3rd time. This time the regimental history says they got remarkably close to the breastworks of the enemy. And I don't know what remarkably close means, if it's 5 yards, 50 yards, 75 yards. But obviously the writer of the history was impressed. He said they got remarkably close. But at this point when they got stopped, they couldn't go any further. Those that could turned and headed back to the Union lines. Some walked, some crawled, some ran, but they got back however they could. 255 men from LaSalle County made that charge. 66 came back. That leaves 189 men laying on that field, dead and wounded. Of the 66 that came back, I'm sure most of those died within a few days of their wounds. But those 189 men laying on that field laid there all day. It was 9:15 a.m. on a Sunday morning when they made that charge. 90-some degree heat. We're in the grips of a terrible heat wave. And they laid there all day while the siege of Jackson continued. And at night, no help came. The guns settled down when it got dark, but no help came. Monday morning, July 13th, the siege began again. Those 189 men were still laying on that field. They laid there all day. Monday night came. Men on both sides wrote there was no sleep to be had with all the cries and the moans that they could hear out on that field. Some of the men were begging for help, begging for water, some were begging to be killed. Just kill me now. No help came. Finally, Tuesday, July 14th, again, in the middle of a heat wave, about 10 a.m., Johnson sends a courier across the lines under a white flag with a note. Sherman thinks they're going to finally surrender Jackson. But the note said, for God's sakes, but show some compassion. We have all these men out in the field. Let's have a ceasefire so I can send out a burial detail and we can collect the wounded and tend to them. And anybody knows anything about Civil War, you know Sherman was not a compassionate man. Sherman didn't show compassion very often. He figured the harder war was, the sooner it would be over. But he knew these were his men. These were men under his charge laying out there. If they were Confederates, I guarantee there would not have been a ceasefire. But they were Union men that affectionately called him Uncle Billy. So he sent the courier back with a note on the back side of the original note saying, we will have a 2-hour ceasefire commencing at noon. And it'll go for 2 hours. So it was sometime between noon and 2 p.m. on July 14th when the burial detail went out and they collected the wounded, that George Poundstone was found laying on that battlefield. He had been shot through the thigh, he was shot in the chest, he was shot through his left eye, about 25% of his skull missing above his left ear. It's a wonder he was alive. 2 days later, in that terrible heat with those wounds, but he had to know he was dying. He had been in the war for 18 months. He knows men have died of lesser wounds. He knew he was dying. But sometime, while he was laying on that battlefield, like Bob said, he thought of this flag, a flag that he had carried into all those battles, the flag that he carried on marches for hundreds of miles and he slept with every night for 18 months. He tried to save the flag from being taken as a trophy of war. Sometime in that 48 hours, he tore the flag from the flagstaff. He stuffed it inside his tunic to try to keep it from being taken as a trophy of war. If he had died, they probably would have dug a shallow grave and rolled him into it, and the flag would have never been seen or heard from again. But he didn't die that day. He was alive long enough to be taken prisoner. And the flag was discovered by the 1st Brigade of Kentucky, and they celebrated and they cheered and they passed this flag up and down the battle lines. And they let every member of their brigade cut off a 1-inch square as a souvenir of the day they captured an enemy flag. And you're going to see the missing pieces of this flag in a few minutes. Poundstone ended up dying of his wounds a few days later, we know that. We're not sure what happened to the flag, but in 1885, it was, we just noticed earlier, in 1885 it was sent from the Confederate War Department to the Washington War Department in Washington, D.C. It was, and of course they knew it was our flag because in the center stripe it said 53rd Illinois on it. And so anything 20 years after the war, 1885, this is 22 years after it was captured, it shows up in Washington, D.C. Anything Civil War related made big news 20 years later. The older soldiers were dying, everybody's writing their memoirs and diaries, and people are now starting to collect artifacts of the war. So it made big news. And the New York Times wrote an article on the front page of their paper explaining Lauman's ill-fated charge and how George Poundstone tried to save the flag by stuffing it inside his tunic, and how the flag is forever stained with his lifeblood. That story went viral, to use a more modern term. Newspapers from all over the country picked up the story and ran with it, even our Ottawa Daily Times did. And so it was decided that this flag that all of a sudden became nationally known should be sent back to Illinois. And it was sent back, and Governor Oglesby decided that this flag should be put on display and it should be set in the rotunda of the Illinois State Capitol. And they had a rededication ceremony. So this isn't the first dedication ceremony for this flag. They had a dedication ceremony. Hundreds of Civil War veterans throughout the state came. And Oglesby said, and I'm paraphrasing, at that dedication, he said that it is appropriate that this flag represent all the men and boys, 259,000 men and boys from Illinois who fought for the preservation of our Union because of that stain. That stain represents the sacrifices made by not just Poundstone, but all the men and boys from Illinois. This flag stood in the rotunda for, do the math in my head, 35 straight years, all by itself. In 1922, Howland Hall was built, a new governmental building down in Springfield. And by then, the state had started collecting a few dozen of these flags. And they thought, well, maybe we should put all the flags together and have a hall of flags. It would be a pretty nice display. So it was taken, it was put with its brethren banners, and it was put on display. And from 1922 till 2003, another 81 years, this flag was on display down in Springfield. But 81 years of flags being exposed to the elements, not being preserved correctly, started to take their toll. Civil War buffs, local historians, people started screaming, these are not just cool old flags. These are historical artifacts. These are national treasures. These flags should be treated as such. And the state of Illinois did something right. And I don't say that sentence very often. The state of Illinois did something right. They took an old tank warehouse in Camp Lincoln, just an old brick building, and they built a state-of-the-art climate-controlled facility inside there. And they filled it with cabinets that are fireproof. And it has 7-foot by 7-foot drawers, only about 1 inch deep, so these flags could be laid flat between acid-free paper. And they're in a locked fireproof drawer. They're in a locked room, in a locked building, behind a gated fence at the Illinois National Guard Armory at Camp Lincoln. They are very, very safe. In 2012, Chuck Stanley, a friend right here from the Ottawa Daily Times, Streator Ottawa Daily Times, Chuck Stanley wrote an article about Sgt Poundstone. A local historian from Grand Ridge had been bugging him to do an article about Poundstone and his exploits and the flag. And Chuck wrote that article. It was a fascinating article. And I read that on Memorial Day weekend, 2012. And it had local history, it had Civil War, it had flags, everything I'm interested in. I read it and I reread it. But what caught my eye was a sidebar article that said, you know what? We have all kinds of these flags down there. They all have a story behind them. And these flags can be preserved. If an individual or an organization would raise the money to get these flags restored, preserved, reframed, they can be sent back to their local counties or their local hometowns, where the descendants that followed these flags into battle can see them and appreciate the sacrifices that were made. So I read that article and I thought about it for about 12 hours, and I got up the next day and I was determined. I had a County Historical Society board meeting that afternoon, and I presented it to the board. If I do this project, will you get behind me? They obviously said yes. And then a week later, the Streator Land Historical Society had a board meeting. I presented them with the same thing. And of course they said yes, because this is what historical societies are supposed to do. Collect, protect, preserve articles and artifacts that represent our local history. And this does that. So that's how, between him writing the article and me reading the article, and then me getting my family and friends and historical societies excited and getting behind it, that's why we're standing here today. And that's the history of the flag from the time it was born to where we are today. So we're just about ready to unveil the flag. Before I do that, if you've noticed on your program here, after the history, we're going to have the 33rd Regimental Band play the Battle Cry of Freedom. The 33rd Regimental Band is a reenactment band of the 33rd out of Normal, Illinois. Normal was the teaching college down there. The 33rd Regiment was known as the Professor's Regiment or the Teacher's Regiment, and it was made up of professors and students of Normal University. Well, it wasn't university then, it was just Normal College back then. Now it's Illinois State University. But they had their own regiment, and they had their own regimental band, and now there's a reenactment band. And they're very good. They came up and did a fundraiser for me a couple of years ago. And it was that fundraiser that put us over the top to raising the money to get this flag restored. They wanted to be here today to play Battle Cry of Freedom, but they couldn't get the right mix of instruments to be able to be here. So I promised them that we would play the Battle Cry of Freedom from their CD. If you turn your program over, the words are on the back. You can follow along if you would like. The Battle Cry of Freedom was the most famous song in the 1860s. It was a very popular tune. Civil War buffs, I know the song. Anybody who's seen a Civil War movie, I'm sure has heard the song because it's always playing in the background. So Kathy, if you would, we're going to hear, this is the 33rd Regimental Band's.
Shouting the battle cry of freedom, we will rally from the hillside, we'll gather from the flames. Shouting the battle cry of freedom, the Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars, while we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Shouting the battle cry of freedom, we are springing to the call of our brothers gone before, shouting the battle cry of freedom, and we'll fill our vacant ranks with 1,000,000 freemen more, shouting the battle cry of freedom, the Union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah! Down with the traitors, up with the stars, while we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Shouting the battle cry of freedom.
If that doesn't stir you a little, you don't have a patriotic bone in your body. Now it's time to unveil the flag, and I've been waiting to do this for 4 years now. There's only one thing give me more pleasure than that, is to let two of my friends do it. So I'd like to call Jerry Hoslander up. Jerry was on the board of these two people, I think it's kind of conspicuous, didn't get thanked earlier when I did my thank yous. Everybody knows this project. Jerry was on the board of the Historical Society long before I even heard of the Historical Society. And he was on there after I left. But he was my liaison between that board. He was also my liaison with the Star Rock Civil War Roundtable. If you listen to WCMY, the last Friday of every month, he and Ron Slack do a local history segment. And I got to sit in on one of them one time. Thank you. He's also married to the young lady that made the flag back there. And I'm sure he helped with that in one way or another. Because that's what Jerry does. He helps. He helps whatever you need.
I stayed out of the way.
There you go. Sometimes that's the best help you get. The other gentleman I'd like to ask up is Stan Jijic, my good friend Stan. Stan was the president of the Historical Society for the 2-year term before I was president. And he was a great mentor, and he's a great local historian. And I was the face of this project, and if that's the case, he was the backbone. Because from day one, Stan was always, why don't we do this? Hey, I got an idea, let's do this. Do you need help? I've got hands. You know, put me to work. What can we do? Constantly offering support and help. He made trips to Springfield with me. He went all over the county with me, selling chances on that flag. He listened to me do my program I don't know how many times. I'm trying to get him to learn it so he can do it. I can stay home. So if you two want to get over here, one on either side, it's only held up with a few taps. And after I will, you'll be able to tell when to do it. Just a second here. So ladies and gentlemen, citizens of LaSalle County, I give to you the 53rd Illinois flag, the Poundstone flag. Now, just give it a touch. Need help? Okay. There you go.
Bravo!
As you can see, it's very impressive looking. I was going to point out the feature. I'll let Alex do that in a couple of seconds now. Most places just hang the flag on the wall. We did one better. We had a carpenter come in. John Pomeranke, you want to stand up and be acknowledged? Our carpenter. I explained to John how I want it, and he called and left me a message, and I got a better idea. And he said, we're going to hang that on the wall. I'm going to trim it out. And it is a very, very impressive display. Thank you, John, for taking a national treasure and just making it look that much better. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask Alex Dixon, the young man standing over here in the corner. Alex worked for the Illinois State Military Museum. Alex is the guy who was actually the curator of the flag. The conservator. He worked on the flag, I don't know how many hours, but he did it 1 inch at a time. So he's going to tell us a little of what he did and maybe point out some features of the flag.
So, first I have to say, the best part of this entire process is this part, getting to see the community come out, to see how excited they are to be here for these things. So, it's one thing to walk in the building and have trays and trays full of flags and get to see whichever one you want. But to see the passion behind a very particular flag has always been the best part. And this is my third one I got to do. So, and this is my last one I got to do. So this was very exciting. But as David said earlier, these flags hung on display for about 80 years. Silk flags are not meant to last that long. The biggest difference between Union flags and Confederate flags is that the Union were made out of silk because cotton was kind of on short supply at the time. So the northern flags are very, very fragile. In the state of Illinois, we did a couple things right with this regard. Back in the 1920s, you can see this black meshing that's all over it, kind of gives it a dark tint. That was the highest quality conservation effort at the time. And there were groups of women traveling the country, and they were sewing this mesh on every flag that would be allowed to have the process done to it. Illinois put up about $3 million at the time to do this process. Without this, our flags are gone. Did anybody get to see the Hall of Flags when the flags were there? A couple of people. So if you by chance remember looking on the bottom of on the ground and seeing the piles of dust and flag scraps, these flags were literally tearing themselves to pieces. This process saved them. The person who trained me was from Iowa, and they didn't do this process. And she said it was common for her to get a new flag collected that was in a box. She would open it, and there was just a pile of scraps. And for the next 2 months, she would spend her time putting a puzzle back together. And then she would start the conservation process. So we're very lucky in that regard. But the actual cleaning process took roughly 300 hours. I was one of 7 people doing it. I had university staff, I had museum staff, I had a volunteer who was spending almost every day with me. And there were many times where you would go slowly crazy. For instance, the first thing we do is we take Q-tips and we clean each individual piece of fringe. We straighten it out, we take a cleaning solution, we gently clean off any surface dirt, and then we straighten them. We do that both sides, because the fringe is pretty important. We vacuum the whole thing. There's a whole bunch of surface dirt that's just sitting on there. Pollen from 150 years ago. The flag I did before this, I couldn't work on it for more than an hour before my allergies were acting up. The lady I mentioned earlier, she got poison ivy off of a Confederate flag, so those Southerners are still getting us today. So, we don't want to leave any of that stuff on there. We want to pull it all off to try and make it look as good as possible. So we vacuum them. After vacuuming, we take cosmetic sponges and we dab the entire flag. And about a 4-inch square piece, that white cosmetic sponge is black. from all the dirt that it's pulled off. And we did that 3 complete times and they were still coming off black. So the amount of effort we put into cleaning it is higher than any other flag, but it was still, as I said, still pulling dirt off. So after that we have to hydrate it. The other bad part of being on display on their original flag staffs is you can kind of see these long fold marks that kind of go down like this, and when you get closer you'll be able to see a little better. These flags hung on those staffs for 80 years, and so that silk permanently folded. So we had to try and reverse that, and we used what's called a preservation pencil, which takes a humidifier and heats that moisture up to about 110 degrees, and we force that into the flag. That's going to help that silk relax. We did that 4 times on this flag because it refused to settle down. The blood gave us innumerable issues, so we didn't want to ruin it. That's kind of the big aspect of this flag. So we had a lot of extra steps we had to put in there. But eventually, this flag is probably one of the best looking ones that we've done because it had so much effort, or extra effort on it. If you make it to Joliet, they have the 122nd on display, and they have more of these little dimples that you'll see when you get close. So after the hydration, we do what to me is the most stressful part. I've done 3 of these flags and I still hate every part of this. We create what's called Band-Aids, which are just little pieces of adhesive for fabrics. Because the paint chips, and you'll see again when you get close, there's little cracks in it. We have to make a way to stop those cracks from spreading or to reattach pieces that have broken loose. And the way to do that is to take a wood iron and put it onto the flag. So you have a piece of metal designed to burn wood that you're putting on a 150-year-old piece of silk, and it's still stressful. But that little Band-Aid we put on there is 100% reversible. So if it, 20 years from now they have a much better method that's not as damaging, every one of those Band-Aids could be pulled off and replaced with something new, and that's what we want. Nothing that we did today, or did on this flag, is not reversible. Everything can be undone if we need to. So we go through, we fix all the cracks on the paint. After that, we have to build the frame. We have to attach the flag down to it, and for that we just sew it down with some really strong thread. So we attach the actual flag, and then when you get close, you'll see little pockets that all the fringe are in. You can see the little gaps. We don't want the fringe to fall down and get in front of the flag, so we secure those all down. And then we transport it. So it's heavy, it's huge. One of the biggest processes before we were doing it was shipping the flag back from New York to here. That process alone was about $6,000. That's one of the big things that we're trying to save the communities by doing it here. But like I said, it took about 300 hours, 7 of us working on it. A lot of stressful moments and kind of big experiments for us in the lab. And a couple weeks ago, David came down and picked it up, and we sent it back. And this is our 3rd flag that we've done in-house at the Military Museum, so it's a really big deal for them down there, and it's been an honor being a part of that process. So I'm excited it's back home though.
Thank you. Mary Lou, can you bring the drawing thing up here when we draw the replica flag and get to the punch and cookies? I'm sure that's why everybody showed up, right? Punch and cookies.
Bobby, help her with this thing.
I'd like to ask Jean to come up here.
Oh, here she comes. There we go.
Jean is our quilting seamstress extraordinaire. H. Fabricus. There you go. H. Fabricus is the name of the winner, 4310486. So I will be giving, H stands for him or her, a call to let them know they're the proud owner of the replica flag. I want to thank everybody. I went through a list of thank yous at the beginning of this. but there were literally dozens of people who helped one way or another on this project, whether you helped one of our fundraisers or made donations. Every donation added up to this flag being on the wall back here in LaSalle County. Whether it was a $5, a $10, or a $1,000 donation, it all added up, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. We have punch and cookies. Thank you for coming.